At long last, the Disney animation that everyone knew and loved from either the days of Walt or from the 1990s finally came back. The result of Bob Iger's plan of having the leaders of Pixar also lead Disney's animation studio started to fully pay off, where not only were the movies themselves receiving more praise from critics and audiences as it brought back Disney's traditional formula, but they were also becoming financially successful, where for the first time in years, Disney animation went back to the top at the box office. Sure, it took some time for The Princess and the Frog to be considered a Disney classic, but once Tangled made its debut, that was when they finally got the perfect recipe of combining their timeless storytelling with new CG technology capable of making fresh classics for the modern era. Oh, and on top of that, Disney also cracked the code with their more experimental side, as they created a more contemporary non-musical feature with Wreck-It Ralph, and that turned out to be another great hit. But when it comes to their next film, nobody, not even the people at Disney, would ever expect the cultural impact it would make. This wouldn't just be another animated movie to add in their collection, but rather a global phenomenon that could even surpass the achievements of The Lion King. And who better to overthrow the king than a queen? A queen who unleashed her unforgettable ice powers in Frozen. It's the story of the two princesses of Arendelle, Anna and Elsa, who had to be secluded from one another due to the latter's ice powers that she didn't fully know how to control. After their parents tragically died when they became adults, this left Elsa to become the new queen of the kingdom, opening its gates for the first time in years to the public to witness her coronation. However, after a bad confrontation with her sister, her ice powers get exposed and Elsa runs away from her own kingdom, resulting in Arendelle to be in a snowstorm during the middle of summer. Now Anna heads off and teams up with an ice harvester named Kristoff with his reindeer Sven and a talking snowman named Olaf to find Elsa and stop the storm so she could come back home. Out of all the movies made by Walt Disney Animation Studios, this was the one that took them the longest to bring to life after numerous of failed attempts over the course of more than 70 years. If you've been following the story of Disney Animation's history, then you may remember when Walt wanted to develop a biography of Hans Christian Andersen during the late 1930s and early 1940s, where he planned to collaborate with MGM, where Disney would provide a set of cartoons based on Andersen's fairy tales, including the Snow Queen. While there was some debate if Walt and the gang could pull off turning that story into an animated short, the entire Hans Christian Andersen project had to be shelved due to the company placing all of its focus on making World War II films. On a side note, a few decades later in the late 1970s, the company once attempted to turn the Snow Queen into a theme park ride. While it never got past the drawing board, one of Walt's 9 old men, Mark Davis, drew concept art for a potential attraction called the Enchanted Snow Palace, where guests enter into a literal winter wonderland where they encounter penguins, polar bears, seals, snowball men, and more, having fun on the ice, and even get to meet the Snow Queen herself. Later on, in the 1990s, Andersen became relevant at the studio again, where the animators were more committed to bringing his stories to life and using those scrapped concepts from Walt's abandoned project as inspiration. They already made a Little Mermaid movie, and they were in the process of turning the Steadfast Tin Soldier into a segment of Fantasia 2000. But when it came to the Snow Queen, as much as they tried to make that their next potential feature, they just never found a way to properly pull it off. Many ideas were suggested to alter the tale in order to create a better story for modern audiences, like using different curses or change motives that would lead the male protagonist to find himself with the Snow Queen, switching some roles where the queen became a good lover for the male lead instead of the friend who seeks out to look for him, and adding a variety of comedic sidekicks that would tag along the journey. Many have tried and many have proposed several ideas, but all of them failed, leaving the studio to shelve the Snow Queen again in 2002. 6 years later, after Disney Animation and the whole company was under new management, one of the new heads, John Lasseter, convinced one of the Tarzan directors, Chris Buck, to return to the studio, since he was at Sony Pictures Animation and finished directing the Oscar-nominated Surf's Up. When back at Disney, Chris proposed several ideas on what to make as a potential movie, but one that stood out for John was a concept for a musical adaptation of The Snow Queen, one whose plot would deliver a new definition to true love. And so, Disney took another shot at the tale to turn it into a possible new animated feature, which the story was originally closer to the source material. However, once again, the team was confronted with one problem, and it was the same one that plagued the previous attempts that led to their downfall: the title character. The original tale alone was tough to adapt due to its dark nature, but the real challenge was to make the Snow Queen herself a likable character that audiences could connect with. Sure, she's always been the villain of the story, but that's not enough for her as a prominent character in a movie. She needed proper motives, human qualities, a backstory, something that could develop her into a more believable and complex character. One solution they came up with was to turn the protagonist next to the evil queen, now called Elsa, into her younger sister, Anna, giving the movie a new family dynamic that could add some layers to both the story and to the girls and become less dependent on the Hans Christian Andersen story. By that point, in the start of 2012, one of Wreck-It Ralph's screenwriters, Jennifer Lee, was brought on board to help with the writing, and the team was already ahead by having more creative freedom and established several ideas for the picture. When she came in, her contribution was fully establishing who Anna is in the story, making sacrifices of concepts that she both loved and hated in order to give her a coming-of-age story where her view on love would change over the course of the feature, along with taking inspiration from her own relationship with her older sister to develop the bond of Anna and Elsa. She also made a massive change to the comedic snowman Olaf, where he went from being Elsa's obnoxious sidekick that Jen wished him dead for how mean-spirited he was, to Anna's naive and innocent helper who aids him along her journey. A few months later, because of the large amount of contribution she provided, Lee was promoted to a co-director with Buck. While several characters were established like Anna, Olaf, the male hero Kristoff, and later the backstabbing Prince Hans, there was only one significant character left to fully establish: the Snow Queen herself, Elsa. For years, she had been the movie's villain that would have tried to rule the kingdom with her army of snowmen, but there was still something that didn't really work about her. Something that would have audiences end up genuinely liking her and understand her position of what she went through by the end of the movie. The solution came not from either the directors or the writers or even the animators, but from the songwriters Robert and Kristen Anderson Lopez, who came on board after Disney was delighted by the work they've done in 2011's Winnie the Pooh. In total, the duo wrote 25 unique songs for the picture, but only 8 ended up in the final cut, and 7 of those that didn't make it found their way in the deluxe edition of the soundtrack. As they worked on the musical number for Elsa, instead of just making a straightforward villain song, they decided to try out something that would present her as someone more sympathetic and vulnerable. That she was constantly controlled by her own fear due to not being able to control her powers, but finally free to be herself now that she is alone. And that song turned out to be what everybody knows today as Let It Go, Let It Go. At that moment, Disney finally found the Snow Queen that they had been searching for decades. The team had to completely rewrite the first act in order to properly fit the song onto the movie, sure, but the extra work was worth it now that they have finalized Elsa. Originally, the movie was planned to be animated and hand-drawn. However, due to the complexities of the winter effects and Elsa's ice powers, along with the financial failure of 2011's Winnie the Pooh, they switched those plans to have it be entirely computer animated. When the team prepared to capture the look of the picture, they went to 3 key research trips to fully understand how they could create Arendelle, led by the movie's art director Mike Giamo. There was Jackson Hole, Wyoming to understand the physics of going through mounts of snow, Quebec City in Canada to visit the Ice Hotel to know how the lighting works in Elsa's Ice Palace, and the biggest trip of them all, Norway. Specifically, in Braigan, the Akashis Fortress, the Nadaro Cathedral, and more to indulge and study Scandinavian culture, its architecture, natural environments like the fjords, and legends. Unlike other computer animated films, where the animators usually animate scene by scene that often feature multiple characters in them, the team at Disney decided to approach the characters in a similar fashion to hand-drawn, where some are assigned as supervising animators to just one character in order for them to fully understand who they're animating and their personalities to believably bring them to life. Some of these include Becky Breezy for Anna, Hiram Osman for Olaf, and Wayne Unton for Elsa. Some of them even looked at their kids for inspiration of the characters' mannerisms. By the way, speaking of kids, the voice of young Anna during the song Do You Want to Build a Snowman was sung by one of the Lopez's daughters, Katie, and Jennifer Lee's daughter, Agatha. In order to fully capture the immersive backgrounds of the snowy mountains and the fjords, along with their great scale, Giaimo decided to present the picture in CinemaScope widescreen, inspired by the cinematography of Black Narcissus and The Sound of Music. Speaking of snowy mountains, that also proved to be a big challenge to believably develop onto computer, and to have the characters look like they're in the middle of a blizzard, since snow is a complicated property that is between being a solid and a liquid. So after the Wyoming trip and having a few lectures on the science of snow, the team created some new software specifically to develop credible snow like Matterhorn and a snowflake generator that could create 2,000 different snowflakes that each have a unique pattern. They also used the software Spaces specifically for Olaf to allow him to deconstruct and rebuild himself at will. As for the costumes, like the snow, the animators knew that they were dealing with something far greater that was never achieved in an animated film. Yes, clothing and CGI can be complicated in itself, but the 19th century fashion in Frozen takes it to a whole new level with layers of rose-mulling detail that feature intricate patterns and noticeable use of fabric, stitching, and more. Not only was character designer Jean Gilmore hired to act as the costume designer of the movie, but she and Mike Giaimo had to go to the Disney Parks costume division to bring in some samples for the texture artists to simulate how those materials can work in the animation. At the start of 2013, just several months away from the movie's release, the team realized that there was still some work to be done with the story. Even if they already got a whole bunch of the animation complete and Christopher Beck signed on to score the movie after providing the music for Paperman. Along the way towards the finish line, they had to redo songs and plot lines, take out some more unnecessary characters, but just like with Let It Go, it had to take another song from the Lopez's to solve their problems. This time, with For the First Time in Forever, setting the core of the movie's heart and the contrasting personalities of Anna and Elsa. And quite similarly to that song, after Disney spent that summer heavily promoting the feature, especially at the parks, Elsa told the guards to open up the gates and release the film on November 22nd, 2013, accompanied by the first Mickey Mouse cartoon since 1995's Runaway Brain called Get a Horse, and it immediately took the world by storm. Critics were praising the movie, stating that it is in the same league as some of the greats in Disney's Renaissance, especially when it provided some awe-inspiring technical achievements in the animation, the unforgettable characters that got help from some great voice acting, and the songs that are on par with the works of Howard Ashman. Later on, the acclaim would turn into trophies as Frozen became a prominent name during awards season, winning several awards, especially for Best Animated Feature and Best Song for Let It Go, like 2 Grammys, 2 Golden Globes, 5 Annies, and 2 Oscars. For the latter, this makes it the first time that Disney Animation won an Oscar since Tarzan, and the first time they earned more than one since Pocahontas. But as great as the reviews were, those were minor compared to how Elsa became the box office queen, even far surpassing the expectations of analysts. At first, it stayed behind the shadows of The Hunger Games Catching Fire, but eventually, the movie reigned supreme for months in theaters and ended up earning $401 million domestically and a worldwide total of $1.28 billion, making this Disney Animation's first movie to earn more than $1 billion and the second animated feature to ever do so, with the first being Pixar's Toy Story 3 in 2010. And with that number at hand, it even held the title of the highest-grossing film of 2013 and the highest-grossing animated feature of all time for nearly 6 years until the 2019 remake of The Lion King took its place. Following afterwards, Frozen became one of the biggest phenomena of the decade, where even the songs, especially Let It Go, were some of the biggest hits of its time, leaving society to be categorized by two different kinds of people. There were those who couldn't get enough of Frozen and never stopped singing the songs, and those who couldn't stand hearing them over and over and over to the point that they were ready to declare war on Arendelle.
That's it! I can't take it anymore! That queen's going down! Who's with me?
I am!
Count me in.
We'll show her who's boss!
Let's get her!
Yes, I'd like to purchase 5 plane tickets to Norway, please.
There she is! Let's get her!
Can't I just relax for one day without having to deal with this nonsense? That's the 14th angry mob within the past few hours. Make that 15.
But like I said, those who loved Frozen just couldn't get enough of it, and it was what fueled the movie to become one of the biggest film franchises of the decade, with merchandising flying off the shelves and Disney earning millions upon millions in return. Disney created some small follow-ups like the animated short Frozen Fever, that's about Elsa surprising Anna on her birthday while the Queen has a cold, which was presented just before Disney's 2015 remake of Cinderella, and a holiday special called Olaf's Frozen Adventure, where Olaf tries to learn about the true meaning of the holidays that showed before Pixar's 2017 film Coco. Between 2014 and 2015, the story arc of the 4th season of Once Upon a Time was dedicated to a crossover with the movie, and for the stage, Disney made 2 different types of musicals based on Frozen. One was for the Hyperion Theater at Disney California Adventure, and the other was on Broadway that had a decent run from 2018 to 2020. In 2016, they rethemed the Epcot attraction Maelstrom and turned it into Frozen Ever After, where guests enter the realm of Arendelle where they meet the characters and encounter Elsa at her ice palace. And in early 2019, Arendelle became a level in Kingdom Hearts 3 where some of the voices from the feature like Idina Menzel, Kristen Bell, Jonathan Groff, and Josh Gad returned to reprise their roles. Throughout Disney's history, there have only been a few tasks that were as truly challenging as adapting Hans Christian Andersen's The Snow Queen into a beloved animated musical. A challenge in which not even some of the masters of the industry were able to pull off. However, after several decades and failed attempts to bring that ice palace to life, Disney finally found the perfect recipe to turn the story into one of the most iconic animated films ever made. And it was all thanks to the combining forces of the entire cast and crew at Disney Animation. If Tangled didn't prove it yet, then Frozen was the definitive film that presented to everyone that Disney was still able to create animated masterpieces, just like the ones that Walt used to make. They started with the tale of a queen with ice powers, and since then, they let the storm rage on. As Walt Disney Animation Studios returned to the top of the industry thanks to Frozen, the anticipation for their next features were at an all-time high, where their animated films were once again considered major motion picture events. While it would be next to impossible to outperform Elsa's magic, at least Disney Animation set their standards to where audiences could expect something great when they come out with a new movie, including their contribution to Marvel, Big Hero 6. It's about Hiro Hamada, a 14-year-old super genius who gets the help from his brother Tadashi to figure out a good use for his brain to help him in life. So he brings him to his university's laboratory and introduces him to his friends Go-Go, Honey Lemon, Wasabi, and Fred. But just when things were looking great for Hiro's future, a fire broke out at the university and ended up killing Tadashi, leaving Hiro alone with a healthcare robot his brother invented named Baymax. But when he discovers that the fire might have been caused by foul play and got attacked by a mysterious masked man, Hiro and Baymax team up with Tadashi's friends to use their scientific expertise to turn them into a group of superheroes called Big Hero 6. When growing up, there were two passions that Don Hall had in his life: the animated films of Disney and the superhero comics of Marvel. He already followed one passion by working at Disney Animation and climbing up the ranks to the point of becoming a director with 2011's Winnie the Pooh, but the other would coincidentally fall into place where Don could achieve his ultimate dream that he never thought would be possible. Back in 2009, the Walt Disney Company acquired Marvel Entertainment, along with its roster of 5,000 characters, for an estimate $4 billion, where the CEO Bob Iger encouraged the divisions at his company to find a way to integrate something from Marvel in some of their projects. For Hall, this was his golden opportunity to combine his two great loves and turn a Marvel story into a Disney animated film. While working on Pooh, he was going through those comics to see which story would translate best into animation. But then he stumbled upon something different, something that he had never heard of compared to Marvel's more popular heroes like Spider-Man and the Avengers. It was a small comic series that started in 1998 called Big Hero 6 that was made by the group Man of Action, the same team that created the Ben 10 series. As he pitched it to John Lasseter, they both saw that there was some strong potential to create a solid and emotional story and decided to greenlight the project. The idea also impressed Bolt director Chris Williams, where he also signed on the project to direct it with Don. Now with a new comic book movie at hand, their first challenge was to figure out how to take two contrasting brands and seamlessly fuse them together into one animated film. Let's be honest, it's not like they could treat this like Frozen and turn this comic into a fairy tale style musical. They had to find a way to fuse Disney's emotional core onto Marvel's superhero format. After some big discussions with the people at Disney and some big heads at Marvel like its chief creative officer Joe Quesada and the executive vice president of Marvel Television Jeff Loeb, they all agreed that Disney's Big Hero 6 should primarily be its own entity. Marvel wouldn't plan on either making comic tie-ins for the film or include it to its Marvel Cinematic Universe, but they did lend a helping hand with the creative process of the feature, including changing some concepts established in the comics to better suit the film, and giving them full creative freedom to do whatever they want with the story. One of them, suggested by Joe Quesada himself, was to replace Hiro's dad as the creator of Baymax with a new character that is his brother Tadashi. However, unlike most of the other Disney films, they knew that they couldn't just get away with explaining the extraordinary in the film with
magic.
Considering that this is a more robotic-oriented superhero story, the team had to use science to explain the logic of the movie, and it had to be accurate to real life. This is especially the case with its star robot, Baymax. In the original comic, Baymax was more like Hiro's mechanical bodyguard that could shapeshift either into a big mecha, a dragon-like beast, or a large man. In the movie, however, they decided to completely change his appearance in order to be more, huggable, as they call it. But how can you make a movie robot look like something that can be easily approachable and soft to the touch when they're usually depicted being made out of metal? Well, that answer can be found at Carnegie Mellon University's Robotic Institute, where Don and a group of designers went on a research trip and discovered their latest invention of soft robotics. When they were there, they interacted with a robotic arm that has an inflatable vinyl shell covering its mechanical skeleton that was made in the hopes to be used in the medical field as an assistant to doctors and nurses, and that's when they knew what Baymax was going to be made of and was later brought to life with the help of anime mecha designer Shigeto Koyama, along with giving him a minimal face with a design inspired by the pattern on Japanese Shinto bells. Speaking of Japanese, since the comic had a prominent theme of Japan, the team took great influence from the country to establish the movie's aesthetic, even looking into anime series, Hayao Miyazaki movies, and Shogun Warrior toys as sources for inspiration. And while the movie may not be set in Japan, they did create a Japanese-like area called San Fransokyo, a combination of the geographical map of San Francisco and the culture of Tokyo. The reason for this mix is not only because San Francisco was never a prominent location in a Marvel story before, but it also made sense in a historical context, since Japanese immigrants helped rebuild San Francisco after the 1906 earthquake. However, just like those two cities, the animators wanted to depict San Fransokyo as a highly populated and always busy city, using software like Denizen and Bonsai to fit in over 700 people and 250,000 trees. The team also created a new software called Hyperion that was made to advance their lighting technology in their animated features, including how the light reflects on Baymax's vinyl body. A few months before the release, after the crew went to watch Marvel's latest feature at the time, Guardians of the Galaxy, they realized that they forgot to add in one important element as a Marvel movie: a Stan Lee cameo. Yes, this was meant to be its own thing with no relation to the other MCU pictures, but animated or not, an appearance from the legendary comic creator himself had been a tradition in almost every Marvel movie up until Avengers Endgame after his death in late 2018. So to make sure they don't disappoint the Marvel fans, one of the last scenes they made was the post-credit where Fred gets a visit from his dad, who is actually Stan Lee. When The Six set out to theaters on November 7th, 2014, it was paired with the animated short Feast, which later won an Oscar and an Annie for Best Animated Short. And while Big Hero 6 was not part of the MCU, it turned out to be as good as some of their better ones. Critics generally had a fun time with the film, saying that it is as heartwarmingly touching as it is excitingly action-packed. It also later collected a good number of nominations at the awards, and won a few like Best Animated Effects at the Annie Awards and Best Animated Feature at the Oscars. And at the box office, while it could only make around half of what Frozen collected, it still came out as a massive hit with $222.5 million domestically and $657.8 million worldwide. While Disney and Marvel agreed at the start to not push it to have the Marvel treatment after the movie came out, it did have a little legacy that can be similar. It had no official Marvel comic, but it did have a manga, a whole set of action figures, appearing in video games like Disney Infinity and Kingdom Hearts 3, and an animated series in 2017 that was made by the creators of Kim Possible, Bob Schooley and Mark McCorkle, and had most of the cast return to reprise their roles. The show ran for 3 seasons with 56 episodes, and it even spun off into a comic series by IDW Publishing. As Disney was completely out of their element with this and had to make the drastic jump in 1 year, going from a traditional fairy tale musical to a comic-based superhero movie, they succeeded in their tough task of blending Disney with Marvel, taking the superhero action-packed format and mixing it with the heart and pure emotions with the theme of family. Not only did the team try something new, but they did so in a way that was fun and touching, that took an obscure Marvel story and turned it into one of Disney's most exhilarating franchises that made everyone satisfied with their care. 2 years later, Disney's next feature allowed the team to try out something that was both old and new. They may have a long history of producing cartoons that feature anthropomorphic animals, but the way they modernized this one and added some unique commentary turned it into something unlike any other Disney animated film. Just like before, they headed towards another completely different direction as they moved cities from San Fransokyo to Zootopia. All her life, Judy Hopps dreamed of being a police officer in Zootopia, an urban city where a variety of mammals, big and small, live harmoniously in one major metropolis. She managed to make it happen through her own determination, but soon discovers that the opportunities she's been given are quite limited. But her luck suddenly flipped when she decided to prove herself that she is a worthy addition to her superiors by cracking a major case where several predator animals had gone missing after reportedly going savage. So with the help of a con artist fox named Nick Wilde, Judy goes all around the city to solve the mystery of the savage predators, and might even discover that Zootopia may not be the perfectly unified city she always thought it was. The idea all started when Byron Howard wanted to make a movie in the style of a Disney film that he felt nostalgic for, Robin Hood, where all the characters are anthropomorphic animals that could walk and talk like humans. Sometime after directing Tangled, he pitched to John Lasseter several ideas that all featured that same theme. He may not have picked a specific one to approve, but he was totally on board with an anthropomorphic animal picture, since it had been a long time that Disney had ever done one of those for a film, and Lasseter had fond memories growing up of watching the Wind in the Willow segment in The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Not to mention that it would give the animators a new challenge of making a movie where they not only have to animate several different talking animals, but those who can stand up on two legs and wear clothing over their fur. And so Howard and screenwriter Jared Bush went to work on an idea called Savage Seas, an all-animal 1960s style spy flick. As they pitched to Disney's Story Trust, the result of their work turned out to be fine, I guess. The spy stuff is cool and all, but everyone at the Trust were all fixated over one part of the feature: the first act. In the original plans, the movie would have started off in a city that was made for animals by animals, and the creative heads at Disney really got into that idea in particular. As a result, Byron and Jared ultimately decided to scrap the 1960s and spy angle to make it all about the city and replace those elements with a contemporary crime scene. Later on, Byron would be promoted to a co-director, and Wreck-It Ralph's Rich Moore joined to direct alongside Howard. However, even if they got their core concept in place, they still have to take many steps until finalizing what would be the movie's story. Early on, they knew that they wanted to include a social commentary on prejudice and how that can not only ruin lives, but also completely corrupt society. Inspired by the documentary The Eye of the Storm, their idea to present this in the film was with tame collars, where despite the city's population is only 10% predators, the prey ruled a law for their safety that the predators have to wear this shock collar-like device that only activate when either their hunting instincts kick in or when their emotions get the best of them. For a while throughout production, the plan was going pretty well, including getting some animation done on some scenes and getting help from Dr. Shakti Butler on the discussion of bias. But there was just something in them that didn't entirely work, specifically with the collars. They didn't want to pin the blame entirely on that though, so they tried ways to alter the scenes to see if there could be any improvement. But it wasn't until they screened what they had planned to Pixar when they had to come in and tell them the cold hard truth. They saw the potential in the movie, and as much as they want to enjoy and get immersed in this animal city, they just couldn't help but hate it because of those collars, and how there was this blatant unfairness that's corrupting the place without anyone doing something about it for the longest time. It certainly wasn't an easy pill to swallow, but deep down, even before their talk with Pixar, they knew that was the problem all along, and ultimately decided to throw out the tame collars altogether and replace them with stereotypical prejudice. Another major change they had to make to the story was regarding the lead. The movie originally starred Nick Wilde, where he wanted to open a business in Zootopia, despite the odds and bigotry that's against him. Again, they knew they had something with this idea, but the more they tried to develop Nick and explain more his backstory, the less the plan felt like it was working. There had been several debates if Nick was even the right fit to be the protagonist of the story. But during those times, there was one other name that kept popping up that sounded more and more appealing to take the lead in the film. It was a bunny who is a cop in Zootopia that tags along Nick's adventure through the city, and also discovers the prejudice that lies within. Her name was Judy Hopps, and when they started experimenting with focusing more on her side of the story, that's when they knew that the movie was finally coming together. As the story team was getting to work on fixing up the plot, the animation crew prepared themselves to visually bring Zootopia to life, especially with creating all the citizens that inhabit there. They started by taking several research trips to look at animals either up close or in their natural habitat, like in the San Diego Zoo Safari Park, Las Vegas, New York, Disney's Animal Kingdom, and in Kenya, where they learn about the different textures of each animal's fur and how they live in the wildlife. Speaking of fur, like I said before, the team knew that the biggest challenge for this film was not dealing with fur in general, but studying how one animal's fur is different from the others, how they reflect on the light, how long or short they can be, how they interact with a variety of environments, and how they fit in clothing. This proved to be a real task for them, since the last time they had to work on prominent animal characters with fur was Walt, and back then, they were having a hard time dealing with him wearing just a leash. So to upgrade their technology, the team invented a new software called iGroom, which gave the animators full control of the fur and shaped them however they wanted to make them look different from one another. There was also the task of rendering all the individual strands of hair on their body. At that point, Disney was only used to animating computer-animated humans, where Elsa, for example, would have 400,000 strands on her head. But when they had to deal with animal characters in Zootopia, some like Nick and Judy would have around 2.5 million strands on them each, and the bigger they are, the more hairs they have, including the average giraffe having a total of 9 million. While the inhabitants of Zootopia are a big puzzle on their own, there was also another they had to face: Zootopia itself. As they did get inspired by major cities to build the area, including making buildings that come from a variety of times, like some that are more contemporary and others that are a few generations old, the real challenge was convincingly have all these animals with different sizes, like an elephant and a mouse, and that come from different environments live in one metropolis. Their solution around this was to build different sectors in the city that specialize either in a specific climate, like Tundra Town and the Rainforest District, or made for special-sized animals like Little Rodentia, along with the main downtown hub, Savannah Central, that would have all of them mingled together like one big watering hole. This also helped the animators with the use of color, architectural style, and effects to use for each area. Just like the city itself, there are places where the movie can be a little more different than others. One significant variant was with the title. There are many places where it stayed as Zootopia, but in some countries in Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and in the UK, they called the movie Zootropolis instead due to copyright laws where others already called dibs on Zootopia. And in Germany, not even that could work, so they had to call it Zoomania. As for China, they decided to go more straightforward and just call it Crazy Animal City. Another regional difference with the film is the news anchor and their voice, which are done by real news anchors. While the standard version next to the snow leopard is a moose, where he's voiced by Peter Mansbridge in North America and by Vassos Alexander in the UK, Brazil had a jaguar voiced by Ricardo Bocha, Australia and New Zealand had a koala voiced by David Campbell, Japan got a tanuki voiced by Kazumasa Kora, and China had a giant panda. When Judy traveled to the big screen on March 4th, 2016, the movie was also released in IMAX theaters, making it the first time for a Disney animated film to do so since Treasure Planet, and its success turned out to be larger than Zootopia itself. At the box office, the movie was breaking records along its way in order to achieve $341.3 million domestically and $1.024 billion worldwide, making it the fourth animated feature to cross the billion-dollar mark, with the third being Illumination's 2015 film Minions. And with the critics, many have stated that this was Disney's best movie they released since The Lion King, where the grand and amazing animation brings to life inspiring characters, enjoyable humor, and a powerful message that speaks against bigotry and discrimination like racism and xenophobia, right on time when problematic politicians would use that in order to fuel their base. Later on, Zootopia became another of those animated films that collected a prominent number of awards and nominations, especially for the Best Animated Feature category, including winning a Golden Globe, 6 Annie Awards for Best Storyboarding, Best Character Design, Best Voice Acting for Jason Bateman's performance as Nick Wilde, Best Writing, Best Directing, and Best Animated Feature, an Oscar, and it was named one of the top 10 films of 2016 by the American Film Institute. While Zootopia would become a prominent contemporary Disney classic, there was at one point where the movie did get in a bit of trouble the same way that Nick would. A year after its release, Esplanade Productions, which is the company of Total Recall co-screenwriter Gary L. Goldman, filed a lawsuit against Disney claiming that Zootopia ripped off their old idea they pitched at Disney both in 2000 and 2009 called Looney. They stated that not only were some of the characters eerily similar, but the movie also heavily took a lot from its themes, the location, and even the Zootopia name itself. After going at it for months in court, the judge ultimately dismissed the case, stating that the similarities like the themes are not enough to go after someone for copyright infringement. As it is a tradition for Disney animated features to include emotional messages to convey tough discussions with its audience, never was there one that is as powerful as the one from Zootopia, whose themes of prejudice and corruption make a strong statement about the problems with our modern society. Something that is almost unheard of to be proudly displayed in a highly entertaining mainstream animated family film. And thanks to Zootopia's success, Disney has once again placed themselves in a new height in their legacy, where they made it to the point that not only were their movies have returned to being award-winning beloved hits, but they also gained the ability to become one of the very few studios that could produce billion-dollar blockbusters. They may have been considered to be at the top of their game since the Renaissance, but for the rest of the 2010 decade, they would soon know how far they would go.
In the beginning, there was only ocean. Until the mother island emerged.